Guys, what's going on? Hello and welcome to Serial at Midnight. My name is Heath, and in this episode, it's the return of the Serial at Midnight book club as we shine a spotlight on Tony Curtis, the Autobiography. Now, it's a little confusing because he wrote a few autobiographies. He wrote another memoir in 2008, near the end of his life. That's called An American Prince. I think he died in 2010, so that's the most complete. But this is the better reviewed, and it's chronologically the earliest one. So I wanted to start there. A lot of takeaways, but you guys, I'm not gonna tell you everything that I read in the book, but I do have some takeaways, some things that I thought were very interesting. I want you to go read it if it sounds interesting to you. But you know, probably from watching this channel, that I just love Tony Curtis, and it's been fueled over the last couple of years as we're getting all these other movies. You know, yeah, I know some like it hot. I've always known Spartacus, right? But in the last couple of years, thanks to companies like Kino Lorber and their deal with Universal, because Tony Curtis was under contract. Tony Curtis was under contract for years with Universal. He would do other things with other studios, but so much of his work was at Universal. So because of that Kino Lorber deal, we're getting stuff like The Son of Ali Baba, which is that's the movie where he says, "Yonder valley lies the castle of my father." And I used to do that impression, and then he talks about how much he hated that in this book because he felt like it was belittling him. He did not share the jokes. I'm probably not going to do that anymore because I want to respect him. You know, there's a Tony Curtis box set from Kino Lorber. He's the film noir, The Dark Side of Cinema, Volume 5. There's a movie that I just reviewed in that box set. I'm discovering his 50s work is what it comes down to. Seeing the progression from, early, I think his first appearance is 1949 in the movie Crisscross, Burt Lancaster, Yvonne DiCarlo. If you only know Yvonne DiCarlo as Lily Monster Jack, you got to check out one of the great glamour queens of the golden age of Hollywood. Stunning beauty. They would write movies for her. She was wonderful. Anyway, this is not the Yvonne DiCarlo. That's probably forthcoming. She has a book too. It's hard to find. But I'm discovering his 50s work, and I'm seeing that transition from, workaday actor in these lower budget productions into, Sweet Smell of Success, Some Like It Hot, and then, from there on, Spartacus, and then all the hits that come after that. But it's an interesting story, and it's kind of heartbreaking because, it's so complete, and you can see who he was, you can see where he came from, and I don't even know if he realized. Maybe he did, as of this writing in 1993. Maybe he did. It started, growing up a young boy in, basically inner city New York. Like not a great neighborhood. In a time of World War II, he's a Jewish boy. His real name is Bernie Schwartz. In a time when it was not great to be, there was a lot of persecution. You could get beat up just for being who you are. And kind of had a chip on his shoulder about that. It comes up all throughout the book. I was just a Jewish boy. People, that identity, that sense of identity fueled him. And then another thing that is a huge takeaway for me is that when he was younger, he had a younger brother who was hit by a vehicle when he was a kid, when they were both kids, and he died. And Bernie Schwartz, Tony Curtis, was supposed to be watching his younger brother. And his brother got hit by a car and died. It was a truck, actually, I believe. And I think, there's no conclusions. We draw our own conclusions. I think he never recovered from that. And then his mother held a grudge against him. She would beat him. And then he had another younger brother that came later that was so much younger than him that he had no relationship with him. And he was mentally troubled, ended up spending the last years of his life in an institution. But he was saddled with that, too. You got to take care of your brother. You got to take care of your family. These are people that had not succeeded. And then Tony Curtis does succeed in Hollywood, and then he ends up bearing the burden of his family, of his younger brother, and he resented it. So one of the things that becomes very clear is that he saw the world through his zipper. That's a nice way to put it. Much of the book is about his sexual conquests, about what co-star he was having an affair with. And it's interesting. He said, like, for a while I thought that my co-stars were there to be, romantic interests for me. And he would, any place that he could have these moments with him in the dressing rooms, whatever. So much so, after he gets married to Janet Leigh, from Psycho, he gets married to Janet Leigh, and he's still carrying on all these affairs, just cavorting all over town, and it wasn't a secret. And so the movie, we're about to get the movie The Apartment with Jack Lemmon on 4K. That's about to come out from Kino Lorber. I'm very excited about it. He talks in this book about how that movie is about him and his sexual conquest. He knew a guy that had an apartment kind of up on a hill, and if the guy wasn't home, he'd be like, hey, can I go use the apartment? And he would go and he's like, my license plate was TC1. I would try to hide the car under the awning of the house, but everybody that drove by would have known what was going on. And people would be like, hey, what are you doing out? They talk to the other guy, like the press agent guy. They'd be like, what are you doing out? He's like, well, Tony's in my apartment. So they wrote a screenplay about this thing, and it becomes a major, it's a major hit. It's a major award. It becomes a major hit. And it's all wrapped up around Tony Curtis's extracurricular activities. And something else that's really interesting is like his inability to have these monogamous relationships. And so he cheats on these women. This book ends with marriage number 4. I believe it was. This was published in 93. He married number 4, I believe, in 1993. And the book ends, he's talking, it's not a spoiler, right? It's an autobiography. It's not like it's a plot. The book ends and he's talking about, I finally found the one. I have more sense of belonging and peace than I've ever had before. They were divorced 1 year after this book was published. He also talks about his children. He didn't have a close relationship. Here's the thing. After he divorces Janet Leigh, or she divorces him, which he doesn't get super into, but, clearly his demons, right? His infidelities, and then later the heavy, heavy drug use. He has like Jamie Lee Curtis and Kelly Curtis, they go live with their mom. He has no relationship with them. He's not seeing them. They're not spending time with him. They would a little bit when they were older. He was never there for his kids. He was working. He financially supported them, but there was no relationship there. It's fascinating. It's absolutely fascinating. And, Jamie Lee Curtis would talk about her dad. Talks about him a lot in here, about how because they never had that close relationship in their older years, now he's more like a friend, or was when he was here. He's more like a friend, and they shared bonds of substance use. So many stories. He talks about Marilyn Monroe. Oh, I want to finish this thought. So all these marriages, right? Four marriages at the time of this book, and he's constantly philandering. He's constantly slinging it all over the place, throwing it wherever he can get it. And the marriages that ended against it sounds to me like the marriages that ended that weren't his choice had to do with infidelity on his wife's part. So he would go have all these affairs. Everybody knew about it, but if his wife had an affair, he could not handle that. And that's interesting, right? There's that ego. He's so proud of his looks. He talks constantly about how beautiful he is. I think it was a smokescreen. I don't actually think he was that confident. I think that it was this facade that he had presented so he didn't get hurt. And of course, if you are cheating on your wife and then you expect her to stand by you, and then she cheats on you, and you're like, wait a minute, that's the height of hypocrisy, right? So it's so, and I don't have judgment for any of these things. He did what he did. These relations, they don't have anything to do with me. I'm just reading the story, but it forms the picture of who this man was. It doesn't make me like him any less. The years of of cocaine abuse, the years of all the substance abuse, doesn't make me like him any less. It's part of the story. None of us are perfect. We all go through these hills and valleys, these peaks and valleys. I think that he went through the valleys that he did, all those broken relationships, years that he had no relationships with his kids, which is sad. 1 year after this book was published, one of his kids overdosed on heroin and died. He had no relationship. That's the price you pay for that lifestyle. There is a cost. You know what I'm saying? You can't just go have fun recklessly and live as if there is only today and only you matter and there not be consequences. And he lived the consequences. And I'll be interested to see how those consequences follow him throughout the next, till 2008. Here's some stories behind the scenes. So there's the apartment story, which is fascinating. Marilyn Monroe, I think this is kind of common knowledge, but Marilyn Monroe had a really hard time on Some Like It Hot. Couldn't get her lines right. She'd do so many, like 60 takes. The line would be like, oh no, and she could not get it out. She'd be like, oh no, nope, and she'd cut. She wouldn't let Billy Wilder cut. She'd cut. And everybody just be like, what are you doing? So then the infamous line comes out, what's it like to kiss What's it like to have a love scene with Marilyn Monroe? And he was like, it's like kissing Hitler. because they had some experience. I can't repeat one of the stories on this video, but he's like, Marilyn Monroe doing something very intimate to a part of his anatomy. So just leave it there. So she was having a really hard time on the set of Some Like It Hot, and she would say coffee break in between takes, and then her person would come out with like a thermos of it was just straight vermouth, and so that was what she was. She was constantly drunk, constantly. According to Tony, I'm gonna say allegedly. According to Tony Curtis, it's not my story. I don't want anybody. Cereal at Midnight said so and so. This is all according to Tony Curtis. Stories about Sweet Smell of Success, people that were going to be cast in it. Oh, how he like stumbled upon the voice of Cary Grant as the high society guy in Some Like It Hot, because he's doing Cary Grant. If you don't know that that's Cary Grant, then like half the jokes, most of the joke is lost. He's doing Cary Grant, and he loved Cary Grant. Cary Grant was like one of his mentors. Orson Welles, there's good Orson Welles stories in there too. Orson Welles would come in to the back of the Maison restaurants in Hollywood. He was too big to fit through the front door, so he would come in the back with his dog Kiki. I just read an Orson Welles, My Lunches with Orson, which is going to get talked about in Classic Film Flavors episode 3. It's already recorded, but it's not out yet. But I talk about My Lunches with Orson. But the dog's name was Kiki. He says it's Fifi, but it's Kiki. You can see how he get those confused. But Orson Welles loved him. Everybody seemed to... Elvis, there's stories about Elvis. Elvis called him Mr. Curtis. He'd be like, call me Tony. And he'd be like, oh, thank you, Mr. Curtis. Because he respected him. He was, he grew up watching Tony Curtis on screen. It's kind of a chronology. He does take you chronologically through his whole career. He doesn't spend... Some of the movies, there's a filmography in the back of the book. And I wish that it was a little bit more detailed, a little bit more involved. They give kind of, a brief, this is the capsule summary, but he doesn't talk much about some of the films. Like, I just watched The Midnight Story. I wrote a review for The Midnight Story. I loved it. It's Tony Curtis, directed by Joseph Pevney with I'm looking for the cast list. Gilbert Roland, who I thought was great in the movie. He did it because he wanted to work with Gilbert Roland. But it's like 2 lines. It's literally like 2 lines. And I was like, could we have more of that? So maybe in the second book, I don't know. But you guys, it's not new, as we've established. It's 1993, but it's, classic Hollywood stories remain classic. And even at the end, you can look back and you can see, after rehab, after the divorces, after the drug use, after his career has been he's taken jobs just to pay his mini alimonies. You can see that he never really reconciled the death of his younger brother, and he was always looking for acceptance. He was always looking for love, loved by the dashboard light. You know what I'm saying? He was always trying to fill that hole that was the guilt of the death of his younger brother and the disapproval of his mother, right? And he hated his mother, but he loved his mother, and that's a cocktail. I don't know that anybody could outrun that. That's some heavy stuff. That's a heavy burden to bear. But it's a fascinating book about a fascinating man who has a wonderful body of work. And I do highly recommend it if you're into classic Hollywood. I wanted to do a spotlight about this so we could discuss it. If you've read it, let me know your thoughts. If you want to read it, let me know, and we can continue the conversation in the comments below. I've made it this entire... Look at that handsome man right there. This picture in particular, like... it's pretty explicit. He was a sex symbol far longer than his 50s and 60s work. Even on into, I would say even as late as this, he was still a viable threat. Quite probably a viable swordsman if I had to guess. It's just so interesting to me. All right, guys, we're gonna wrap this one up. Thank you so much. Take care. Until next time, here's where to go and what to do.